Hi, I'm Jason King, the Beirne Chair and Director for the Center for Catholic Studies here at St. Mary's University. Today we're talking to Dr. Nancy Rourke, and she is the author of Ecological Moral Character, a Catholic Model. She came to us as part of the McTaggart Lecture Series on the Catholic intellectual tradition, and she spoke about the future of Catholic higher education from a Laudato Si perspective. We had a wonderful conversation about how she got into theology, how she ended up studying in Ireland, and how she got interested in the environment. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome to Beyond the Lecture.
Welcome, Dr. Nancy Rourke. Can you say a little bit about your current position?
Thank you. It's good to be here. I am Associate Professor of Religious Studies and Theology at Canisius University, which is in Buffalo, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been the director of the Catholic Studies program. At the moment, I'm Interim Department Chair of Religious Studies, and I've been there for a long time. At the same time, I've also been serving as an adjunct professor in Religious Studies at St. John Fisher University in Rochester, New York. Yeah.
It's working at Catholic schools, so we often carry many hats.
Yes,
Not just one.
which is fun.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit about how you ended up doing theology?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird path. So, I was raised in an environment where there were a lot of different versions of Christianity in the air. My dad was a traditional Irish Catholic in a lot of ways, and my mom had been raised in the Reformed tradition, which is pretty prevalent in areas of central upstate New York. So they have very different kind of like cosmological views of the world. And I was going to church at the Catholic church on Sunday morning, and then 2 parking lots over, about after Mass, I'd walk over and get into the Methodist service, which was most of the way underway, to sit with my mom through that. And by the end of your average Sunday, I was like pretty bamboozled. So it resulted in some theological confusion. So I think that more than just the obvious emphasis in my upbringing that religion's important and being a person of faith is important, trying to get some kind of a resolution to all of the confusion drove me to try to learn more about it here and there. And a lot of the places where I looked to try to make sense of it were not helping. It just kind of added, no, the real version is like this. No, Christianity actually is like this, and kind of competitive, combating cosmological perspectives. So I thought, well, all right, we'll try grad school. And I actually was intended for aiming for ordained ministry in the United Methodist Church.
Oh, really?
So I had the hope of being a college chaplain.
Did you do theology, religious studies in undergrad?
No, it wasn't an option in any of the schools where I went for undergrad.
Really?
The closest area of study would probably be philosophy, but I was not good in philosophy. I was kind of intimidated and had a hard time trying to follow what the readings were trying to explain to me. I majored in English and Russian.
Oh,
so
wow.
I don't really know how to explain that trajectory, but it helped me to understand the importance of literature and, the things that fiction can do for our imagination, which is an important part of thinking about morality. There is this, but what if it could be otherwise? And I think that's been really helpful to me.
I was a math major too, but it was through literature that I started getting interested in sort of religion. So that was just a funny, that's interesting sort of path.
Yeah, the stories, religion's stories are captivating and obviously powerful because a lot of their endurance has just been from the history of people repeating them and using the stories and trying to make use of them to make sense of their worlds for centuries, millennia. At some point in grad school, I realized that my homilies sounded more like lectures, so I pivoted towards the academic train and decided, maybe I'll get a PhD. So I went and got a second master's degree from Boston University, and then I went to get a doctorate at St. Patrick's College in Maynooth, Ireland, and pretty quickly on found a couple of different jobs teaching in universities, and then I was off.
You had a good story about getting into Maynooth. Why don't you tell me about that?
I was interested in doing a doctorate in Catholic ethics, and I knew that the principle that I wanted to talk about is called the doctrine of double effect. And I was helping a professor. I was working as a research assistant, graduate assistant at Boston University for Claire Wolfteich and Peter Berger, who were both professors there, and they had a joint project in practical theology. They were hosting a conference in Dublin, and so I was asked to research, what are theological faculty working on in Ireland, and what is it that we could try to offer and how to bring them into this discussion. So I was looking into it, and I found that there was this professor at Maynooth College who had worked on double effect, and I thought, well, I'll apply there, and I applied elsewhere, and elsewhere went, no. So I was like, okay, well, and then Maynooth accepted me, and I thought, well, we'll go find out. I was living in Boston at the time, and I didn't want to leave it. I like Boston, and I still do. But for Ireland, I thought, yeah, all right, I could take that adventure. So I went and did that, and it was really good for me to interject an international component into my education, help me understand what's really distinct and valuable about American higher education. What is it that we are trying to do here, which is pretty different from the way that other places work on forming, a bachelor's degree and forming adults in citizenship and global citizenship. Yeah.
I had a friend in Denmark, and listening to her describe how that system worked was so helpful, but like so different. It was kind of took me aback at times. And some of my, some of our colleagues that had come from Central or South America, how their programs are sort of structured very sort of different. And so
she channeled into a professional track at a much earlier age. I spent my senior year undergrad in Russia, and I lived with a family there, and they were all musicians and string players, and so was I. So that worked out really well. But
what do you play?
I've played violin for decades and fiddle, but I've just started learning the cello a year ago. I've always wanted to, and I love it. So they had a college student and a high school student and a middle schooler, and they all were basically, training in violin or viola, all of them, even at, what we would call like grade 7. She wasn't going to take math. She wasn't going to take, literature. She's going to be studying music, and that was it for that forward. And I thought, that's different than what we do. It was interesting.
Yeah. So after Maynooth, you came back. And
Yep, I taught in New York City at St. John's University for about 3 years, teaching very large classes in the College of Professional Studies, and students of all different majors, and it was a really useful experience. After about 3 years, the job at Canisius University opened up in Buffalo, and I was ready at that point to try to live a little bit closer. I had my life partner at that time was already living in Western New York, and we were doing the two-body problem, distant kind of relationship
really hard,
for 3. It was hard. So Buffalo appeared, and I was like, So I managed to get that job as well, and then spent a good long while, a decade and a half plus a bit at Canisius.
And in the fall, you're starting it.
Yep, I'm leaving Canisius after this semester, and in the fall, I will be starting at St. John Fisher University in Rochester. And that means I'll be working closer to home and working with the students in the nursing school there and the pharmacy school there, and just participating in their gen ed core curriculum and a few of the religious studies majors as well. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a nice change.
Talk a little bit about, you started with the principle of double effect, and your latest book is Moral Ecological Character, so environmentalism. Talk about your line of work that's sort of developed from
they're pretty different.
I did like Lonergan on feelings and decision making, and I ended up with like friendship and work. Like, so it's funny how those paths go.
Maybe it makes sense though. You pick some specific something and really delve into it, but then the question, why does this matter? Why does this matter? Kind of helps us to say, okay, this is why this is important. This is why it helps. And then you might notice other things that feed into that. So for me, it worked that way. I was really enjoying talking about the differences between different kinds of intention that you have to keep track of to use the doctrine of double effect. And then I started thinking, well, why does that matter? Why is it so important? The intention that a person might have when doing an act, why is that the thing that we look to? Not the way things turned out or anything else, but And then I thought, well, the only reason that could matter is because that's a link to the person's like internal moral something, and that led me to virtue ethics. And I also found that in the history of the principle of double effect being applied to difficult decisions, the way that people applied it made a lot more sense to me when they were keeping track of how the intention was fitting in with other parts of their internal, decision making, their internal worlds. And I thought, well, the intention by itself doesn't matter unless there's something under it. And I think that's the thing. It's the person becoming something, the person using the way that they act to shape what kind of a person they're going to become. So, yeah, that led to that. And in a classroom one day, I was teaching a bunch of students about the importance of intention in Catholic ethics. And this was a fun class. It was a rowdy class, and it was really great and enjoyable. And they were really there and working on it. So I said, okay, intention, most important, blah, blah, blah. And this is like my first 3 years of teaching. So I know everything. And, I'm just there to administer my wisdom. And I explained to them, the morality of an act depends on what the agent is trying to do, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, no, that's not it. And I was like, oh, okay, why not? And then they explained, because, humanity has caused all this harm to the environment, and we didn't do it out of an intention to harm the environment, obviously, but we still did it. And that has a moral quality to it. That's a problem. That's a moral problem. And
That's
I said,
interesting.
yeah, it is. Oh, geez. So I had to back up a little bit and start thinking about that. And it got me pursuing environmental ethics.
From that class kind of experience, their framing of it.
Yeah, it really helped me. It's just, to me, it shows how teaching and scholarly research and ethics just really go hand in hand, because the things that come up in the classroom, it's not the stuff that we will come to in our own, knotted up brains. That we need the conversations, and it helps us to figure things out, and the community helps us to figure things out. Yeah. So, yeah, that got me into environmental ethics. And further, I got into thinking about the ways that Catholic moral theology looks at issues about ecological ethics. They often confound Catholic ethics as traditional frames for thinking about ethics.
Yeah.
A lot of our usual norms and rules and principles they kind of flap at it, or they disintegrate. It doesn't fit well. And I thought, well, that seems important. Maybe it's a good way to push back on some of the ways that we think about ethics and about theology. So I was off from there.
That was one of the many things I liked about your new book is that if you start to take environments seriously, or expand beyond sort of the isolated individual, a lot of these categories have to morph, or they don't sort of apply. And so thinking about what your book did on thinking about the virtues in that sort of context and how they change and adjust, I thought that was really both insightful and a kind of promising way forward for the field.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. I think that there's a lot that virtue theory can do to speak to theological anthropology, to speak to, okay, well, this is what a moral character is like. Can we take that back to thinking about what is a person? What is humanity about? And what is our function? How is it that we are different, and how is it that we're not different from the rest, all of creation that we're embedded within which we co-evolved? So I think, the virtue ethics approach to thinking about humanity and the view of the person in a theological frame, they could listen to each other a little bit more carefully. It could be helpful.
Yeah. The thing, one of the insights I got from Lonergan was that there's advantages of thinking about will and intellect and passions, but that framing oftentimes had this ability to kind of separate those two pieces, and then extract it from the particular context that you've got. And so you've got these discrete pieces, but not a sense of the whole, and trying to, and then that kind of approach sort of lends itself to that separation and trying to
fragmented.
all fragmented. And I wonder, this was a thought I had last night too, because you mentioned siloing, that fragmenting also leads to this ongoing sort of siloing we see both in society, but in our lives, in academia, a variety of sort of things, and trying to put it more, and I don't think this was your term, but more understanding of the systems and the relationships within those sort of systems. So.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But and it's an important part of understanding, to break something apart and look at how it stands. You can see it from all sides when you have it separated out. But when it's separated out, at the same time, it's not actually doing the thing that it does. So we have to remember to put it back into its context and say, okay, so now what is it doing and what does it look like and what else could it do? And that step, I think we're not as good at.
I remember the article you wrote for the Journal of Moral Theology and talking about companies coming in for laying natural gas pipelines, the threat to sort of family farms, and but also the lure of the companies, the struggles for sort of farming, this like all of these sort of cultural, economic, environmental pieces. And so when you're talking about like putting everything together, right, that when you're talking about that, it reminded me of that article about how the analysis of it is really all of these moving pieces. And I even remember there was a piece there about Reformed theology that I think we ended up cutting because of the tightness of it, but was sort of an essential, like trying to put all of those pieces together to understand the scope of that.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot more that we could do with more ecumenical thought. I really think I have a lot of hope that in Catholic ethics and in Catholic theology, that looking broader to other ways that other Christianities have approached the issues we're struggling with can help. I think that sometimes we worry too much about, okay, what we need the distinctively Catholic this and that. And I think we've got that, but reintegrating it into other traditions within the religion of Christianity, there's a lot we can gain there. Reformed theology has a very different approach to agency, divine agency, moral agency, and I'm hoping next to think a little bit more about maybe there's common ground there that we can work with, and maybe there's something about the way that Reformed ethics approaches environments that we can work with. So there's a scholar at Hope College, Stephen Buma Prediger, with the hyphenated last name, who does sort of what, he has been doing it longer than me, but does the same kind of thing that I do as far as virtues and ecological systems, but using a Reformed tradition take on how the moral character develops. And I've gotten a lot of help from reading the way that he approaches it. And there's some interesting conversation partner potential there, I think.
Yeah, I find when you have those divisions, you neglect what the other side is using because somehow it's theirs and not yours. And when you're able to sort of come into conversation, you're able to be more sort of fluid. And it reminds me of two things. One, the conversations between Catholics and Mennonites, that was a big one where, in Pennsylvania, where it was for so long, that sort of peace church tradition, and it's sort of really the overlap that you have between that and the Catholics, like that was really sort of, I think, sort of nourishing. So all of those sort of pieces that there was a lecture one time, an ecumenical lecture by a Lutheran when I was in Toledo, and he was talking about how Vatican II made the Lutherans very Catholic, but he was more like meditating on this recovery of things that was part of their tradition, but for so long, because of the tensions between those two, they had been neglected or suspicious of. And so it was a really kind of because I remember it startling me because I've been thinking Catholic stuff all the time, and Catholic and Vatican II, and not this sort of broader conversation that can happen, the fuller pieces that are there.
Yeah, there's a lot. Boston University helped me a lot there. I did my MDiv and my STM there, and Christian history was taught by a Lutheran historian there, and a lot of us were like, oh, man. I mean, it was really very helpful, and a lot of his frame has always been with me since then.
Yeah.
That's good.
Growing up in Kentucky, I remember having this distinctive, not like 8 or 9-year-old me having this insight of like, oh, the difference between me and a Catholic and the Baptist down here is that we've got this one guy in Rome. That's all. That was my whole, I didn't have a stronger sense of those sort of boundaries till sort of much later. It was I just remember trying to process those differences at times. I mean, as you get older, you're much clearer about those, which is probably a disadvantage in some ways.
And I think it's harder to find some of the truly isolated parts of the world that used to be everywhere. When I lived in Boston, I lived in a neighborhood where none of the kids knew what a Protestant was at all. And I do still run into students who say, I mean, maybe Christian, but maybe Catholic instead. And whoa, wait a minute. So some of that is, driven by a mutual suspicion, like you say.
I laugh because Kentucky was mission territory for the Catholic Church, and it was, but mainly French Catholics. And I didn't know what that was or experience till I got to grad school, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of Irish Catholics. And I was like, holy, what is this? And my wife is and her family is very much Irish Catholic with some Italian influence, but they are just all in. And I'm like, this is a funny tradition to me, even though we're kind of at the same church. Thing. It's very different. So
from studying other religions of the world in order to be able to teach them in introductory courses, I've just been becoming more and more aware that it's not the name of the religious tradition that predicates more powerfully what kinds of practices people will do or what it looks like and what it tastes like. It's geography, it's local culture. So a Christian ritual in Kolkata, for example, it will probably look an awful lot like a Hindu ritual.
Yeah.
Because that factor, where you are and what religion looks like, is more powerful, maybe. And I really think that's a good thing. I think it can help us a lot. There's some potential to the way those two categories overlap, even though they're coming from different directions, culture and religion, that I think could help us understand more about what faith means. And again, for me, I think really what being human is about.
I just moved here to sort of San Antonio, which is Catholic, but a very different Catholic sort of culture. And talking to individuals about how they understand it is really interesting. And I mentioned this, I think, the previous lecture before yours was with Victor Carmona, and he sort of traced that tradition a little bit to before the Reformation, and so that it had less of this dialectic or less of these sort of boundaries, and saw in that a more holistic sort of view that enabled a kind of some of the familial sort of practices, the centering of the home. And so it was an interesting sort of story, which historically I knew in my head, but hadn't put the sort of cultural landscape together. So I was like, oh, this is different. It was same, but sort of different. And so it's
That's
so
really great.
It's interesting. And then when you were talking about like how those cultural pieces might be some of those keys, that's really interesting.
I'd like to learn more about that.
I know that's a hopeful note. So I'm going to switch to something less hopeful that we've commiserated about the future of sort of Catholic higher education. And so, because I think we both care about it. We've both been teachers for a long time, care greatly about our students, learn from our students. A lot of our sort of research interests are come from those sort of experiences. But so thoughts on this. I'll ask the easy question first. The state of Catholic higher education, and then I'll ask you to predict the future on Catholic higher education.
No problem. You have my notes here. It's so troubling. I'm not a person inclined to say that things have to stay the way they are in order for things to be okay. I don't think. I think that there are times when I can even feel impatient for some changes to take place. But I am concerned about the state of Catholic higher education. Catholic higher education was never part of my upbringing or Catholic education. I'm from public schools, and it wasn't a part of my undergraduate study at all, ever. It was a state school and then a very firmly non-religious private university in Schenectady, New York, and even the master's level was, under the purview of the Methodist Church. But working in Catholic universities, I've had a chance to really see how it can do something that other universities aren't doing. And I feel frustrated at times because it doesn't always recognize, at least not very well, what it has to give. And I think that it could really be resisting more emphatically the trends in higher education away from understanding education as a public good, a common good, a human right that we serve. The difference between a non-profit university and a for-profit university is becoming more and more difficult for me to understand. And I understand that there are, intractable financial pressures leading to that, but the solutions don't have to be constrained entirely within the ways of the world of that particular kind of understanding. We can exercise some more creativity, some more hope, and some moral courage in leadership, I think, to represent what education is about, what it's for, as a counter conversation, a counter narrative to try to stave off the trends in American higher education towards commodifying it, towards seeing it as a private good or sort of a boutique possession that you purchase by throwing a couple $100,000 at an institution and walking away with a degree. I mean, at some point, when did we decide that it makes sense for 18-year-olds to have to foot the bill for their own job training? Like, when did that happen? That makes no sense. We shouldn't just be kind of like going along with it, I don't think.
I know there's been like economic forces that both like the divestment from the state, which would speak to the common good, and then the lack of job training that's kind of pushed back on to sort of colleges, and then that narrowing of the college as a just about sort of jobs and
narrowing of the vision and the mission. And I think one of the things that get lost in that is the role of the professor as the public intellectual who is there to serve the community. Even though most of the community is not paying tuition to, write the professor's paycheck, the professor's job is to help everyone understand the things that are happening and to make use of the tools of all of our different cultures' legacies to try to untangle the knots that we face. And the right to have access to the tools to untangle, shouldn't be predicated on whether or not you're paying tuition at any particular university. It's not about that. It has to be for everyone. So, I mean, I haven't really said where Catholic higher education is, but you can probably read from that where my frustrations and what my observations are telling me.
One thing that you're noting there that I've often thought, I don't have a plan to enact it, but we do kind of compress education into this, like 18-year-olds, 18 to 21, and like make massive sort of choices at this sort of age without a lot of experience. And then some of the things that would be valuable, philosophy, theology, that become more valuable when you're 30 or 40 because you've got the job, you've got some security, and you're trying to figure out how to live a good life. But we kind of like, well, you're done with that at 20 sort of one. So if we could think about how to be public intellectuals or have a broader sense of education as like happening at 30 and 40, but not having it cost $100,000.
No,
Vanderbilt, right? That's tuition was the first this year to top 100,000 sort of a year, which is astounding.
Yeah, and you are a parent of teenagers, so I imagine it's very viscerally astounding.
My son's like down to sort of 2 schools, and I feel for the kid, right? He's trying to make choice. He's got 2 good choices, but even so. And we're a stable family, have resources, so it's the best situation. But he's trying to imagine, like, do I want to be this kind of person for the rest of my life, or this kind of person for the rest of my life? And even they're both good, but so I don't know how you, even the best of circumstances. I can't imagine.
I have encountered 2 different situations in thinking about ethics and religion for healthcare professionals. One situation is teaching introduction to religion and ethics to, let's say, early on nursing students or undergraduates who are headed towards, medical school, so pre-med students, both of those settings. And I want to talk about cases and scenarios and, what if the patient this, and what if the family says that, and, what's the right thing to do, and then what's also the legal thing, and all these things. And they're willing to play along because it's the curriculum and they have to pass it. And a lot of them are like, I need a letter of reference for grad school, so maybe if I can impress this. But, those are the things they're worried about, and those are the things they should be worried about that lines up with what their goals are. They need to learn how to follow the procedures at whatever institution they're going to work at, whatever hospital, and be medical care providers. They're not ready necessarily to think about the what if of the tricky moral situations, and they shouldn't have to be. So it's difficult because I'm there at that time to present that to them, and I need them to internalize it and understand it well enough in hopes that it's going to be there when they hit those waters. But it isn't a natural fit. And on the other side, I've also served on ethics committees and IRB board for Catholic healthcare system in Buffalo. And here in those conversations, I'm meeting with, nurses and administrators and lawyers and physician assistants and sometimes doctors and, speech pathologists and radio, what do you call it, like technicians who read x-rays and all this kind of a thing, and they'll all be talking about one particular patient case, and if it's tricky and difficult, they're all kind of expressing some frustration at not having the time to sort it through, and sometimes we have to arrive at a decision that none of them in particular feels like it fits with their own personal moral code or their own understanding of what the right thing to do is, and they want space to wrestle with that. And they don't have it because, to take a course in medical ethics at that point would be like, sure, you can do that. We're going to need, $6 or $7 grand right now for 3 months. So, or I don't even know what it would be, but no. But they're the ones that do need it and they want it. And it again, the fit of when this is available to them and when they really could make good use of it, it doesn't line up well. I don't know if that's a factor in figuring out a curriculum at a school. I imagine it's more of a practical matter of we have this staffing and this is the process to become an RN and it has to follow, blah, 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 blah. But there is something about this piece of it, of integrating the work that they do into their whole selves, that we're not meeting as well as we could. So something could be better there.
And it becomes important. A friend of mine was working for a company and they were having this sort of ethical, what I would categorized as an ethical issue about do they work with this client that was a questionable client or not, and my friend called me up. He's like, do you have like some guidance here? And I was like, oh, here's not on the particular case, but like what are some basic principles that we could sort of do? And I said, oh, here's some basic theories like teleology, deontology, virtue ethics, and like here's the kind of frameworks that are commonly sort of available. And so, oh, this is sort of really, really, really sort of good. And I gave it, I sent it to him and said, oh, I'm going to share this. And then, a month later, he's like, oh, they just went for the money. And so you're like, they just couldn't, like, it was struggling to find, they didn't have the principles in place and the decision had to be made quickly. And then you had the interest of the company that were sort of dominant and without any kind of buffer or ethical framework in place. Like there was just nothing, even when they wanted to do something, there wasn't any sort of tools there. So something about that long-term education that's there that Catholics would seem to have, not just Catholic schools, but Catholic schools would have to have some resources to deal with it.
Yeah.
But maybe not when you're 18 or 19.
Yeah, no. At some point, you've been a nurse for 5 or 6 years, or you've been a speech language pathologist for 5 or 6 years, and you start to look at the way that your profession as a whole, your guild, engages with the procedures at any given healthcare institution, and maybe something stands out to you as this isn't what we should be doing. There's a responsibility mismatch in terms of preparedness or in terms of what's needed for the flourishing of the patient's family, and the worker who is burning out, like crazy. So we should be standing there in the hallway ready, to say, here are some possible models. This is another way that could, so that they can, step into the guilds that are there to empower them in their profession and to represent what they do and what matters in the healthcare settings where they work. And so that should be our job too. But a Catholic higher education in the U.S. in general, is not sort of leaving space open for that, because the model is you work here, you benefit these students. These are the students that paid. If they haven't, finished their paperwork, they're not allowed in the classroom. And I'm like, sometimes I'm just frustrated and I want to just get on a Buffalo City bus and stand in the back and go, okay, Immanuel Kant. So you guys should learn this. I mean, okay, that's a little bit extreme, but just because it's free.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what Dorothy Day called those. Like they had those like sort of public kind of. They weren't public classrooms, but they had a little clever name on them. Just that sort of public ongoing
the discussion, the weekly.
Yeah.
We need those spaces.
Yeah. So you've already sort of hinted at it. What else? In the future, what do you think would be helpful? So I'm not asking you to fix everything, but like what are things that seem promising? As I have a belief that higher ed's changing, Catholic higher ed's changing. So what does that sort of look like? How do we hold on to the good? And so what are some things that you think would be helpful? 5, 10 years down the road?
In my experience, Catholic higher education institutes are just populated with people who are there because on purpose, who are there because they think that working at a place like that gives them room to do a kind of a good that they don't think that they can do elsewhere, I think. And they're everywhere. They're running the, the welcome desk at the registrar. They're in the financial aid office. They are cleaning out the dorms. They're serving up coffee, and they're in the classroom, and they're answering the phones. There's a community of of people with a vision at each of these places that have an idea of what they could do, and a lot of the language that they use to think about it isn't possible necessarily in a public university, in a state-run university, and it's drawing on a specific version of Christianity that has a lot that could give to education, of course. So I think that giving space for people working like that across the sectors of a university could be helpful. So for me, again, the answer sort of comes to counteracting the traditional silos and the fragmentation of knowledge and parts of the university. And I have found at Canisius University that the group of colleagues, which is students, faculty, and staff who are working on sustainability efforts, have found some creative and sometimes sneaky, which I love, ways to try to work with people across other divisions of the college to figure out what's it like to set up a meeting that involves, the head of facilities and somebody from the dining hall and somebody in the sociology department, so we can figure out how to do something that involves all of those. There has to be a way to do that. And it can't just be a mandate coming from the top down because, we will know what would work in large part from hearing from the folks who are actually doing the work on a day-to-day. So for example, some of my colleagues started talking to custodians about, okay, garbage. What's most of the garbage that they have to throw out? Like, what's the bulk of it? So we were assuming that there was a problem. We were like, it's styrofoam cups, or it's, the meal containers or something, And they're like, it's trash bags. They said that overwhelmingly, the bulk of the garbage at the college, that we collect and throw out is those little individual trash bags in each little individual trash can in every dorm room and in every classroom. So most of the garbage is empty garbage bags. And we were,
that's
man,
really interesting.
That is so solvable.
Yeah.
So we did, and it was very unpopular, but eventually it will become accustomed to. We removed trash receptacles from the classrooms.
It's plastic and excess
plastic,
waste.
Empty plastic, and another empty plastic, and another empty plastic. And we were just throwing away, like cubic feet of that day after day. Really. And that was custodians' time. Yeah. So they aren't, cleaning the bathrooms. They aren't doing other things. They are collecting air from empty bags in classrooms and putting them.
Plastic bags.
And we were, this is, and it wasn't super satisfying for them, and it was pointless.
It's also that insight from like what's really happening rather than, I always like that. Like there's always this, as an academic, you read things and you read the theory and it's all sort of great, but then that's totally different sometimes than what's actually happening sort of on the ground. And that can provide insights that are so much more helpful than sort of what's going on.
Yeah, we really need that. But the structures that we're moving through prevent us from talking to each other. And there's class involved in that, and there's all kinds of politics involved in that. But we can see through that too if we build friendships across some of those divides and find projects that necessitate us working across those divides. It seems to me that one of the things that Pope Francis calls for in Laudato Si is to counteract these silos, the fragmentation of knowledge. And I can't remember if he names universities, Catholic universities, as one of the places where we could be taking the lead on that or not. But he does say, churches and communities are places where we can try to bore through some of these holes, build some, midway bridges between the silos or something like that. That probably doesn't make sense in a silo agricultural metaphor. But we can try to ameliorate the harms that we would otherwise perpetuate if we were continuing to fit with that model.
Well, and it's the earlier, when we were even talking about sort of ethical theories, like there's an advantage to like breaking things down and there's sort of specific parts, but then not good at putting things sort of back together again. And I think that probably a hard thing sort of for humans, but then more and more I see so many things modeled on that sort of industrial assembly line kind of pieces. Let's break this down. We can specialize, and then but you're not really seeing the whole process or the effects of the context on those pieces, and and so many of the problems now that you've got are much more comprehensive. And so how do you put things back together again? Maybe that's the challenge.
And just in terms of quality of life, the kind of labor that comes from working on something where it's many different kinds of tasks all along, the process of the creating of something. It ends up, you feel a connection to the thing into which you're putting your labor that you don't have when you are having to repeat the same thing on the terms and conditions that somebody else has established for the benefit of yet another person, the owner or whatever. So the satisfaction of the nature of labor. I love that the Catholic tradition has looked at that too. And I think that is a really important part of what feels good about being a person. And maybe it's true for like birds and beavers and stuff too. I don't know, but I think so. Until proven otherwise, I'm going to assume that they also have some version of, mammal-y kind of like, oh yeah, there it is. That's the dam that I built. And we could have more of that, I think, with a different, some more leeway to think about working on things together and working on the process of creating something, like maybe building bridges in terms of, sort of what Ibu Patel would recommend in colleges, or creating new institutes or programs for undergraduates.
Yeah, and even I was just thinking, even your example earlier about the cross connections and the things that people do on campus that are often mission driven, from the people that pick up trash all the way to sort of the professors, that if you had that piece too, in some ways, that whatever role that is too could have meaning in and of itself, rather than the disposable staff work or the disposable faculty work or the disposable student, right? Like, but there's a kind of meaning or purpose within that community of the role that you play, and a respect for that. Like that could be some satisfaction in sort of work.
I have an imagination that if there were a university that could require all employees to adopt somebody else's job for a week, and I mean anywhere, to find out, okay, you've been the librarian, now run the coffee shop. Okay, you've been collecting the trash, now sit down with a seminar of students who had to read something and talk to them. And it would be great for the students. It would be terrifying, and it would never happen, and it would be horrifying also. But it would grant us an insight into what else is happening here that we just really don't even know about. And yet it's the whole world for other people. And how is it that we can work together if we haven't had a taste of that?
That's really interesting.
It would be fun. I would sign up for that.
I would probably too.
I would sign up for that. I think you would.
My wife's family is all academics, and I'm an academic, and she's worked in various staff positions, like director of community service and stuff, but she's always like, oh, there's a hierarchy, and there's a difference between the staff and the faculty. And I was always, well, I should say I was conscious of that. I was always made conscious of that.
Yes.
And that when I can start to see that, like it does, the whole campus starts to sort of shift, and how like, oh, this is what's really sort of going on. And that was the limited access I had to that was really helpful. But I like this proposal.
I like this idea. After I got my first tenure track job, I worked a couple of years. I got a temp job one summer just to earn some more money, working as an office worker in another university, where I was just like, an office worker. And it was a university, and I had a PhD, and I was an assistant professor, and I was on the and nobody there knew that. And the way that I interacted with people was totally different. And it was really humbling how difficult it was for me to experience that, because I thought that I was so aware of the hierarchy, and I was not. I had a lot to learn. It was really good for me. And my spouse works from that sector of university also, and it's so important in my understanding what education could be or should be. And there's a lot of hope to have had there if we can figure out a way through these barriers. We could do that, right?
We could. Well, that's
all right.
That's a good place to end. That's a very hopeful piece, that sense of community, something that's possible. Sort of going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I love what you're doing here, and I'm really grateful to have some time to spend at this university. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a pleasure having you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good.